Hello and welcome to the Connection podcast series. From my own point, just apologies, we've not had any content the last 10 days or so. Very sadly lost my father, who succumbed to a stroke at the age of 73. So I know within the corrugated industry and the folding carton sector, he had a lot of friends who I'd just like to say thank you for all of the outpouring of memories and good stories. But I think Dad would have been probably shocked at how much acquisition and MBO activity there's been. And I'm delighted to welcome back to the fold Neil Osment from NOAA. Neil, welcome. Thank you for joining us again. Neil, let's take a look at this. An awful lot has happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks, off the back of massive price increases and paper shortage. And our last podcast, we were looking at some of the whys and hows. And I'd love to today focus, if I may, on these acquisitions and these MBOs that are taking place. So, Neil, welcome. Let's have a little look at maybe what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years, and let's set the scene before we then move our attentions to what's been going on the last few weeks.
Thank you very much, Dan. And yes, as you say, heartfelt thoughts for Michael. What a great legacy, and it's great that you and I are able to carry on the legacy of 2 organisations. So, turning to what you're talking about, reflecting on the last couple of years about acquisitions. I mean, I've been sort of fascinated with some of the organisations that have been acquired and moved into larger groups, and why was that? And particularly in the UK sheet plant market, companies that have been attracted and brought in. Why was that? You've got companies like Inspirepack, colour reel printers, and even TRM, all that apparently moving in for the specialism side of their businesses, the print specialism and the shelf-ready packaging specialism and the FMCG specialism of those companies. So they kind of made sense. That was a few years ago. As you say, more recently then, and we've reported this in our latest report about particular organisations getting into the market sector of, again, the sheet plant market with Beacon Packaging, Saxon Packaging, and that was particularly the Smurfit organisation, who've grown to become a significant player in that market. And then there was acquisitions from abroad with Schumacher, with Jaffa Box, and with Klingler on board. So, various reasons for the last few years. I think if we turn to more recently, that's interesting too, to see the activity has been has stepped up in the last few months, and we saw a couple of companies. We've got Glossop Cartons and who are in, let's say, a sister market in the folding carton market, but they also come into our own in terms of supplies of paper packaging. And then John Roberts, the sheet feeder, and both of those an MBO. So an interesting one. Perhaps we'll come back to that. And then our friend who was talking only recently, so David Pedley of GWP Group, and what happens there, and people like Solidus, who have bought into, I think it was Heathpack, they bought into our market. So a lot more activity of late, with some interesting reasons why those companies are buying, and it's not about specialisms, and it isn't necessarily about the obvious strategic ones, but I would say that there's a variety of reasons why they've been bought.
So Neil, if we go back to, you touched on Jaffa Box, which was a fantastic move from Schumacher,
yeah.
And then obviously on board with Dr. Klingler and his team taking a step into the UK market. Yeah. Do you think that there was also an element of Brexit in terms of some of these German manufacturers who had pan-European clients that they maybe had to supply within the UK? Do you think those were opportunistic in terms of shoring up their foothold within the UK before Brexit?
I think there's an element of it for sure, and I think there are a number of companies that I'm aware of who are just keeping an eye on the UK market, the UK companies that are available, which tend to be in the sheet plant market. It's a third of the corrugated market by volume, but about half the market by added value. So very interesting for a couple of reasons. One is having a foothold in an interesting growing market. The UK market grew faster than any other corrugated market last year in Europe. And then they're just being involved in some interesting work. Jaffa Box were a highly invested plant, so they were well positioned, well poised, and I think that's an interesting a caveat or a bit of advice. Well invested companies become very attractive. So I think it was Brexit. Yeah.
And of course, Neil, the others that we hadn't mentioned, De Jong making their acquisition or investment within e-corrugated. So for me, it sort of it smacks of some of these larger independent European businesses making a bit of a play within the UK market. But then also, there's all the rumours around, some of the paper mills, for example. We all know, and we've all heard the rumours that Modern Carton from Turkey are looking to see whether they can get their hands on the old Schotten mill to see whether there's opportunity to make that paper conversion there. So it seems to be that we're in a very interesting market, and of course, it's not our position to necessarily comment on this, but I would like to ask your feelings, having you worked with for DS Smith for many years, but there's this whole chat about even on the stock market they're commenting on is Mondi making an aggressive approach for Smith?
Yes.
What's your take on that? Because it's difficult to read when you saw that Mondi were relatively active in the UK for so many years following their acquisition of the old Ancor business.
Yes.
And they bought some of the best plants in the country, or they built some of the best plants in the country.
Yes.
And they then turned turtle and disappeared off to Vienna and eastwards from there. What do you make of that move from assuming that there's legs in it? What do you make of the whole Mondi DS Smith situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you say, these things happen. I mean, if you go back a couple of years, then there was another large American company that was making overtures towards a large European company, and IP and Smurfit. There's a couple of occasions where IP had made bids, and Smurfit repelled it. Very robust company, so that's them. With DS Smith, another European company with some interesting developments in America. As you say, Mondi, very successful company, very well run company. And without the strategic sort of Western European side, whereas a few years ago it had that. And of course, I think the American market is an interesting one. So as a strategic acquisition for Mondi to go further west in Western Europe and buy some plants where DS Smith have got a lot of plants, and with a half an eye on America, it just kind of makes some sense. And if you look at the direction of travel, whether it's big is beautiful, certainly global is the way that companies seem to be going, both in cartons and in corrugated. So it's no surprise that there's been this interest, and it could happen, and it would make good, logical, strategic sense.
Neil, I was actually chatting with Simon Southern.
Yes.
Wonderful name from the past, who obviously you worked with very closely for many years.
We still do very closely, yeah.
But Simon and I were chatting about it, and his view was somewhat, he was perplexed because he felt that the return on a possible acquisition or return on investment would be quite difficult within a very mature Western European corrugated market, because obviously Mondi have over the years sort of moved their attention more towards the paper side of the business. And he's just sort of thought, well, maybe I'm just a little bit long in the tooth, and I'm rather jaundiced by it all. But he couldn't necessarily see the logic. But it was interesting when we started then talking about what Smith had done in terms of the interstate resources and their move into America, and the greenfield facility that they built in Lebanon, in North America. I concur with you. I think from Smith's point of view, they've aggressively moved into the North American market. Yes, they've got a long way to go, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of very big players in the States that would make Smith look like minnows. But interesting move from Smith and from Mondi, really. But listen.
Just on that, just one other thing, of course, is I think, as you rightly say, Mondi have pointed themselves from Austria eastwards. And the development of their paper making in Russia has been amazing. They, and I remember when I was a wet behind the ears sales rep for a corrugated company, there was this company that sold white paper from South Africa coming into the market, and that was where Mondi came first of all, and it was selling this lovely white paper. So white paper, then they've got into manufacturing paper in Russia. So I think the opportunity for them, I think, is a logical one with America. And then who knows, there may be further paper interests for Mondi there. I mean, they are a paper company, but well integrated. So yeah, as you say, watch this space.
So Neil, let's turn our attention now as to, as we know, there's been an awful lot that's happened in the folding carton market, within the corrugated market, and even solid board. Are we really in a situation now where there are going to be more acquisitions? Do you feel, why is it that it's now? Why is it all happening at this minute in time? Is it because there's just money available? Is it people see it as a very solid investment, not particularly sexy, but seeing returns? What's your feeling on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of the last year or so with COVID. Then a lot of people, it's been, first of all, it was survival, but in the corrugated and the carton market, actually quite quickly, it wasn't survival. It was, gosh, how do I keep up with this demand? We've seen, and you look on the some of the documents that we've been publishing through your paper, showing how corrugated has been so resilient and bounced back within months, despite most economies taking a sort of a nosedive. So corrugated has shown itself to be very robust. It's very busy. Money is being earned. I was astounded at the figures that I saw for the turn of the year that showed the UK to have grown by plus 2%. I wasn't astounded by that because I've been predicting that for months. But what I was astounded by was the growth that occurred in December. It's more than plus 10, 12, 15%. So phenomenal growth that's happening in the UK market and significant growth that's happening in other markets. So I think there's been a bounce back for corrugated. I think the viewpoint, and we're finding this in our business, I mean, we do market research, and for 6 months or so, people have been not particularly interested in market research. They don't want to know what's happening in 4 or 5 years' time. They want to know what's happening in 4 or 5 weeks' time, but they've been coming back. So people are much more interested in the medium longer term now. And I think medium longer term is about strategic direction, and acquisitions inevitably come to be part of that. So I think there's that. There's another thing as well. I think there's quite a lot of business owners who they've been very busy. Their books are in good order. Their management teams are well developed. They're well organized. And I think they're in a position where they're saying, I'm ready now actually to sell. We saw David Bedley from GWP talking about he got his team well in place. So his business was well poised. And so the opportunity of a trade sale that occurred. So I think there's for sure, the circumstances are much more long-term, strategic thoughts are much more there. And the particularly, and I keep returning to the sheet plant market of the UK, which grew phenomenally. Plus 2% for the UK, but roughly in the month of December, plus 10% for the whole of the UK. But the sheep plant market grew by plus 15 to 20% in the month of December. So there's a really interesting thing happening in small plants, and that there's people that are interested in selling those small plants as well. So
well, Neil, I think Mr. Pedley owes me a couple of beers, because it is funny that some of the first podcasts that we recorded back in April of last year, I was talking to Dave about how he'd enjoyed the sabbatical. He'd taken some time out from the business, and we just sat down and we recorded a couple of sessions on how and why somebody would look at selling their business. So I mean, let's turn our attention now to maybe sort of give it the headline of being investor ready.
Yes.
So give us your thoughts on what sort of small to medium-sized businesses, if that's what people are thinking about doing. How do you get yourself ready for sale?
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting, because my consultancy work allows me to be able to talk with leaders and MDs, owners of businesses. So I spend a lot of time working with people on this. And we're going through a process at the moment where one of my customers is going through an MBO. And what are the attractive things about investors? And so first-hand experience talking with them, we have a lot of people who go, well, gosh, if you've got some good contracts in place. Now, the company that I'm referring to is outside of corrugated, but having some, but that still holds true for corrugated or for cartons. If you've got long-term 12-month, 18-month contracts in place, and if they're supply agreements and they've got indexing and such like, that's a very good, solid way. The companies will sort of look at that. I remember the time when I was working for a company which we ultimately sold to Alcoa. The management team that you have, are they commercial? Is it a robust team? Is it a solid team? Is it a team that knows what it's doing? That's a very important thing. I also, one of the other things, customer of mine way back in the mists of time at a bakery that was near Wembley Stadium, they were approached by a big organization, and the big organization backed away from them. And there was just some things to do with, was it the accountancy, was it a robust accounting, and were all those checks and balances nicely in place? And they weren't quite. So it was a company called Northern Foods came along, tried to buy them. 3 years later, that Northern Foods company came back. They bought this big company because they got literally all the checks and balances in place, and it was all solid. And those are important things. There is another part of all of this as well is being ready. The other thing is being ready for what? There's trade sale. Typical purchase method is selling it to a trade sale. But actually, some of the things that I'm getting involved with customers of mine is management buyouts, and we saw two of them there. So, Glossop Cartons and the John Roberts were management buyout. So, it's almost like a passing on the baton to the next generation. And then there's various forms of that. There's BIMBO, a buy-in, management buyout, and the such like. But there's other things, and a very exciting one that we're involved again with is employee ownership trust, another way of being able to pass on the business to the next generation. And that's I'm not sure, it's become popular in the UK in the last couple of years, and John Lewis is a best example of that. But there's a lot of companies that are thinking about EOT as another method. It seems to be these three-letter acronyms. It's either MBO, EOT, or SRP. No. Those different methods.
Yeah, but Neil, you're right, because they call them ESOPs in North America.
Oh, yeah.
It's a slightly different variation, but again, it's employee owned.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there are quite a lot of North American businesses that have done that. And I know Bay Cities, for example, Greg Tucker, that became an ESOP, and Sun Automation on the machinery side.
Oh, yes. So
it has happened quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I guess, really, Neil, there was one thing that you touched on briefly during the build-up, and it's something that sometimes plant owners aren't necessarily that focused on. Is actually the machinery that you're using, because if you've invested well in your business, and if you've put a new corrugator in, for example, within the last 3 or 4 years, although it's a massive line item on the balance sheet, I think running a new corrugator or the latest flexo rotary die cutters or whatever it might be, if you've got that good equipment, even though you might not have finished paying for it, it makes you hugely attractive.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, you look, TRM was in that position. We've got another one that
Inspire Pack, Inspire Pack, Jaffa Box, all really well invested.
But as you say, we can list all of those. So it is a way of, one, making sure the business is leading, and I think now is a time where investment is definitely being looked at by a lot of companies, and so it should be. And then, as you say, actually, that doesn't mean that by spending that money, you've missed the opportunity of something else happening. You may well find that it makes you more purchase ready, and as you say, a good way forward. And looking at the lead times of machinery manufacturers, and we're talking 12, 15, 18 months. So I think get your order in now, because I think a lot of people are realizing that it's a good time to invest in equipment now.
And you're right, Neil, because even from sort of March, April time of last year, just as the pandemic started to, get its claws into us, when you talk to some of it, particularly on the converting machinery side, the guys who were looking for, the inside out printing machines for e-commerce boxes, the specialty gluers that can do the tear tape applications, etc., etc. So it looks like it's been a busy time. And Neil, thank you so much indeed. It's been great to catch up. So much to cover, and I think it's probably going to be a case of let's watch this space, because I think there may well be more happening, and of course we will reconvene when that all happens. So Neil, in the meantime, thank you so much indeed. Great to catch up with you, and we'll be in touch again soon.
Smashing. Good to see you, Dan, and to all your viewers.